Today's episode is brought to you by Ground News, which is something that I wish was around when I first started getting interested in and covering politics. I know it seems like common sense now, but it's really hard to sift through all the news that is out there because the same story can be completely different depending on who and where you're reading it from. That's where Ground News comes in. They give you all the versions of the story right in your feed, left, right, and center. They show you those side by side so you can see how the framing changes and you get a full view of the story. They also have a Blindspot feed that flags stories that are being ignored by one side of the aisle entirely. In a media landscape built to keep you in an echo chamber, Ground News shows you the way out. And right now you can use the link in the description for 40% off. It is their best deal on their best plan. That's the Vantage plan right now. You can only get it from Make It Make Sense. Get access to their Blindspot feed, more than 50,000 unique outlets for news, and one of my favorite features is their Burst Your Bubble newsletter, which helps you break out of that echo chamber and shows you your own media bias for all the things that you consume. I think it is an invaluable resource to expose you to different ideas and help keep your own media diet healthy, because a healthy media diet is just as important as a regular diet. Again, use the exclusive code in the description to get 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan, their absolute best plan right now. Things are more expensive than they've been in years. You can see it, you can feel it, and today we got numbers to back that up. We're starting to finally see in the data what the cost here at home is of the war in Iran and the long tail effects of the president's tariffs, which is something we haven't talked about on the show in a little while. So today, we're going to dive into the president's latest numbers on the economy, the latest overall numbers, and the latest with the administration's fight to keep the tariff money, as well as the war in Iran, which is still happening despite what the White House would like us to believe. It's Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. I'm Grant Hermes, and this is Make It Make Sense. This morning marked the latest report on inflation and wages for the economy. What we learned was inflation rose to 3.8%. That's the highest it's been in 3 years. And it rose faster than we've seen it rise in years too. Most of that has been in the cost of gas and groceries. Oil is up 54%, which means gas is up almost 30%, which means your electric and utility bills are up 6%. Because those costs go to shipping things like our food, every kind of food tracked by the federal government, except for dairy products, are more expensive right now. None of those things are things I probably have to tell you. Your grocery bill is more expensive, and filling up your tank, no matter where you live in the country, has been more painful in these last few weeks. GasBuddy, the online fuel price tracker, has the national average for gas just below $4.50 a gallon. But if you take the top 10 most populated states, which is about a third of the country's population, they're paying closer to $4.60 a gallon. Now, the only reason I break that down by population is because that's where the people are, which is where the jobs are, and that's where the tax revenue is, and where people are spending money in the economy. If they're spending more to fill up their tanks, it means they're making sacrifices in how they spend their money somewhere else. Now, this new report on inflation also came as a 1-2 punch for the administration. It's not that things are only more expensive, but it's that the cost of everything has now overtaken how fast wages were rising. Back in March, I talked about how for the first time in a while, we were seeing an uptick in actual wages. Not huge, like 0.2%, but for economists, that kind of growth really gets their engines going, right? Well, when you spread that out over an entire economy, it's a lot of money. And a trend in wages that's going up, not down, is good. But those gains were swallowed up by rising prices and inflation. And last month, as the war in Iran has dragged on and the effects of the tariffs are being passed down to us, the people who buy stuff, it means that actually instead of wages being up 0.2%, they're down 0.2%, not a direction you want to be going. And the hard part to this is that last week we got the jobs report that was surprisingly good. 115,000 jobs added to the economy. That should have been a sign that things were heading in the right direction, and it's hard to circle the square that is what we got today. It's because when you get jobs headlines, you're only getting the headlines. What that job report from last week actually showed us is in line with what we got today. Yes, 115,000 new jobs were created, and unemployment stayed about the same, around 4%. But the numbers don't show that more people are giving up looking for work. And under how we track unemployment, people not looking for work don't count in the unemployment numbers. Why? It's complicated economic stuff, and there's already too much math happening in this episode for me to get too deep into that, but you should just know that that's how we track this. So what all of this means is that your money just isn't going as far, and the economy isn't moving in the right direction. And that has meant for some really, really bad polling for the president and his party. A new CNN poll found that 65% of people disapprove of the job that Trump is doing as president overall. 70% of Americans disapprove of how he's handled the economy. 74% disapprove of his handling of inflation, and nearly 80% said the same thing about his handling of gas prices. Overall, when it comes to the economy, 65% of people blame Trump and his policies for making the economy worse. That number is higher than any number of people who ever blamed Joe Biden for inflation, even as it hit record levels in 2022. And to make matters worse, for Trump and Republicans, lowering prices was Trump's main promise. In 2024, he held a press conference in front of tables of groceries and said things like this.
So when I win, I will immediately bring prices down. Starting on day one, we will end Kamala's war on American energy, and we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill.
And then in one of his final rallies before the election in Pennsylvania, he said this.
A vote for Trump means your groceries will be cheaper. So many people mention, I go in, so many people mention groceries. That beautiful but simple word, groceries. Sir, my groceries. You don't think of it that way, but that's what they mention more than anything, my groceries. Your paychecks will be higher.
And I know, given everything that's happened in the last year and a half, it is easy to forget the weirdness that those promises were. Like, people don't say groceries anymore, or that it was pretty clear that Trump hadn't been inside a grocery store in like decades, if maybe ever. But it was this promise to lower prices on day one, no less, but lower prices in general, that sent him to the White House. And at this point, that promise just hasn't been kept, and now it is really hitting home. And now, you've also likely heard that presidents can do very little when it comes to changing gas or grocery prices. Generally, that's true. There's just not a lot of levers a president as an individual can pull that will change the big economic things like that. But that's not the case this time around, because Trump is actually doing the two biggest things the Oval Office can do to affect prices: war and taxes. And in this case, it's tariffs. As I'm recording today, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is testifying in the Senate about the war in Iran. The White House still maintains it's in a ceasefire, even though last week both Iran and the U.S. exchanged fire, something the president called a love tap. Over the weekend, despite promises that peace talks were within 48 hours of being reached and that would mean an end to the war, Trump declared that what Iran was asking for was unacceptable and sent everything back to square one. The war is now in its 11th week, a full 7 weeks longer than we were promised at the beginning. And the cost of this is now up to $29 billion. That doesn't factor in the fact that we are still running a blockade in the Strait of Hermes, where 20% of the world's oil flows through, which is still running. And as of today, 8 ships have gone through, nor does that $29 billion cover the cost it will take to repair U.S. bases that have been badly damaged in the fighting. So the war is definitely behind the rising prices. That's no surprise. It's throwing the global economy into a tailspin, and specifically the oil economy, and that's a surefire way to make things more expensive. And that's with several weeks without full-scale fighting, which apparently isn't off the table either, a return to that full-scale fighting. Here's Hegseth answering a question from Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski about if attacks on Iran could pick back up, and if they do, how the White House would get around needing congressional approval for that.
Has considered or had intended to seek an authorization of use of military force from the Congress?
Senator, our view is that should the president make the decision to recommence, that we would have all the authorities necessary to do so.
Do you think that it would be helpful to the president if it was made clear that, in fact, the Congress did provide and AUMF.
I think the president, our view is that he has all the authorities he needs under Article 2 to execute.
So the position of the White House here is that the president does get to do just a little bit of war, sometimes, like a treat. Constitutional and legal experts say that is just not how this works. I've explained that on this show before, but really quickly, the Constitution gives the president the ability to decide how wars are fought as commander-in-chief. The decision to go to war happens in Congress because they control the money. But back to prices. Also over the weekend, the president lashed out at the Supreme Court again over their decision to strike down the tariffs that he placed on imports coming into the U.S. Those tariffs raised $287 billion last year, but because the costs of tariffs are passed on to consumers and customers, they cost the average American household around $1,700 to as much as $2,400 last year, according to the Yale Budget Lab. And those costs are roughly the same this year. The thing is now, the Supreme Court and a lower trade court are saying the Trump administration has to figure out a way to give that money back to companies because the tariffs were put in place illegally. Now, maybe that money ends up back with consumers, though don't hold your breath. Over the weekend, the White House asked the trade court that's in charge of this case now to be able to keep collecting tariff money. Again, money the court said was illegal in the first place, but the White House says it needs that money because it's still part of the president's trade agenda, and they're planning to use the funding from the tariffs, which they aren't supposed to be collecting, to help pay for the resources to pay back companies for the tariffs they weren't supposed to collect in the first place. It's like some weird version of robbing Peter to pay Paul if you were paying them in monopoly money you stole from your friend's house. It's also unclear whether any of that will actually land with the court's 3 judges, but it is not looking good for the administration. And that brings us to the last couple things here. Trump is desperately trying to find a way to turn things around before we hit summer travel season and ultimately the midterms. And because of that, right now he and Republicans are floating the idea of suspending the national gas tax, which would lower the price of gas to about 18 to 19 cents. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley officially filed a bill to do it yesterday, suspending the tax for 3 months. This has been proposed before. The last time, it was Joe Biden in 2022, when gas prices hit their peak during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Biden wanted to do the same thing, a tax holiday for 3 months. Back then, Republicans hated the idea. Utah Senator Mike Lee said it was potentially traitor behavior.
While at the same time also driving up inflation. I mean, think about it, Harris. If he just suspends this gas tax for a period of 3 months, first of all, he would end up extending the suspension before the midterms for the reasons you alluded to a minute ago. But even if it were just 3 months, there's a lot of revenue that still has to go. We still have to pay for the upkeep and the maintenance of our interstate transportation network, our interstate system. So where's that money going to come from, Harris? We're just going to have to borrow more of it, effectively printing more of it. You know what that does? That spikes inflation even more. That's why this is treacherous. This is wrong, and we can't let it happen.
On Monday, though, Lee said the gas tax should be repealed altogether because it was only in place to help build the interstates. Quite the about-face in 4 years. And even Josh Hawley, the guy now authoring the bill, called Biden's plan in 2022 a gimmick that was really insulting to Americans. Hawley's current bill is more or less identical to what Biden was proposing. And it does need to go through the House, then likely back through the Senate, and who knows what will happen in that process. The House only got back to work in D.C. today after a 10-day break. And it's also worth pointing out here that suspending the gas tax for 18 cents might actually not matter in the end because of how much the price of oil and gas have been fluctuating. Just in the last few days, prices nationally did fluctuate about 18 cents, so it could just net out to zero in the wash. And last here is President Trump's visit to China this week. He actually left today, and that could go a long way on prices if it goes well. Most of the tariffs are being placed on China, or at least China is paying the bulk of them. And they're getting hit the hardest by the lack of oil coming out of Iran. So Trump is hoping that his one-on-one meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping will go the way he wants. And he told reporters today that the war was going to be a big part of their talks. And that's no surprise, because when the first round of peace talks happened, It was China who was called in to help bring Iran back to the table to broker the ceasefire in the first place. So Trump is now heading to China, and he's the first president to do that in 17 years, which is notable. And he's hopefully going to make some kind of deal, both on lowering costs and likely behind the scenes, find an end to the war to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and maybe right the U.S. economy by Labor Day. It is a tall order, and that's a long ways off. And for now, it means we're going to be paying more for more things for the foreseeable future. I'll have more on the president's visit to China later this week, and with Congress back, there is definitely going to be some fireworks happening around elections and all of those bills that are in the House and Senate right now, but that is for Thursday. As of today, that is it for the show. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where this week's Things You Forgot from Civics class is all about the House of Representatives, how it works, how it's supposed to work, and I thought that with them being back from break, it's important you know those things. And you can get access to that for just $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. You can tag me at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.